Jenny, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I did a little poking around in my email archive, and do you know that we first connected all the way back in 2017? So this
Oh,
virtual
wow.
friendship is 5 years in the making.
Wow, look at
And I
that.
keep holding out hope we'll get the opportunity to meet in real life one of these days.
One of these days. Well, thank you for having me.
Longtime readers of my blog know I've been an enthusiastic fan of yours since I read Becoming Bonnie. Actually, I think it may have been Side by Side. Did Side by Side come out first?
Becoming Bonnie and then Side by Side the year later.
Okay,
But
so
you may have discovered Side by Side first.
well, I've read every adult book you've written since then, and for me, each one is better than the last. So I'm really eager to discuss your latest novel. So let's start off, if you wouldn't mind, by telling our listeners what The Call of the Wrens is about.
Okay, let's see. So, The Call of the Wrens is a wartime novel, which I know some people are cheering and can't get enough of. And there's others who, have read it and see World War II and are like, yeah, been there, done that. So, with both of those mindsets in mind, I tried to create something that's never been done before. And in doing so, I was highlighting a group of women called the Wrens, which is a nickname for the Women's Royal Naval Service. And there's been like mentions of them in other books, and there's some nonfiction books, but this is the first time that they're getting their whole full showcase in a novel. So when I saw that it had never been done before, I talked to my agent about it. And we're like, really? No? This is new? We're like, let's do it. So we were so excited and so happy that HarperCollins and Harper Muse were ready to do it with me. So again, it's about the Wrens, and there's two storylines. And one starts in the First World War, and the second starts in the Second World War. The First World War is Marion's story. Marion's a special character. I really enjoyed writing her. She grew up as an orphan, and she saw the Wrens a way to have this identity, this belonging, a family. And she also had no choice because she was aging out of the orphanage and she had to do something. So she's like, okay, well, I am joining the Wrens. And another really cool element of the book is I was able to highlight motorcycle dispatch riders, which is one of the many, many, many things that the women did as part of the Wrens. And then even carrier pigeons. Like, I haven't read too much about carrier pigeons. And even within all of the research I did, they seemed to be a bit of a mystery. People were like, oh, yeah, we know that they were there. Like, they delivered messages, but we don't know how they were trained, who trained them, the ins and outs of like how they function. So it was so fun to be able to learn that, first of all, and then have Marion train these pigeons and then put them on her back in a cage and drive them to the front line. So there's so many fun elements there that Marion gets to be a part of. Then we have the second storyline, which is Evelyn, and so different than Marion. Her storyline begins in the Second World War, and Evelyn is very posh. She's high society, very sheltered existence. Part of that was because she was very wealthy, but also because she was born with a club foot. So her mom basically treated her like a porcelain doll. So when the Wrens came along as an opportunity, she jumped at it as this way to seek freedom. And her story is a little bit more coming of age. Mm-hmm. So I go back and forth between the two women throughout the novel, and then there's a point where both of their stories come together and a secret's revealed, and then everything changes for both women. So it was very fun to write.
Well, this is your fourth adult novel, mm-hmm. also of historical fiction. What initially drew you to write in the historical fiction genre?
Well, my husband's a very big history buff, so he's kind of fun to bounce ideas off of. He knows so much about World War II, but it was really fun with this novel too. I would, ask him to fact check something, and he was like, "Oh, I don't know. I've never seen that before." And I was like, "Yes, that was awesome. I found something you didn't know." So I think I'm just really inspired and intrigued by things that came before us and how it shaped us today and how it can shape the future and how history repeats itself, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I love finding those little nuggets that haven't been done before. So like with Becoming Bonnie, you mentioned as my first book there. So that one's about Bonnie Parker, and her story had never been told from her perspective. It was always Clyde's perspective or looking at them from the outside in. So it's good to give her a voice, or interesting to give her a voice. And in this case, it was very interesting to find a story that wasn't told and tell it.
You also write middle grade novels. How do you approach a novel differently if it's for an adult audience versus a middle grade audience?
Well, so middle grade, I love both age groups, and I have young children, so it's fun for me to write books that I know that they'll be reading now and not when they're adults and I have to wait quite a while. My daughter is 9 and she always asks me when she can start reading my adult books. And I'm like, well, let's just start with the middle grade ones first. But middle grade is unique in that it really just cuts to the quick. Like those stories are shorter, but they still pack as much of a punch. So you kind of just like jump in and then it's like full force, full adrenaline the whole book. Whereas with my adult novels, I feel like I still want a great pace. I still want to entertain, but I feel like I can really let us sit there and feel and relate it to our own lives. And there's so many scenes when I'm writing that it's obviously not my life, but I'm able to relate it in some adjacent way to my life. So I think that really makes adult different.
All of your books, the adult and middle grade, are centered around real people, primarily women in history. What is it that you like about writing about real people as opposed to completely fictional ones?
So the two in Wrens are fictional, I will say that, but I pulled from various real life women in the Wrens.
Mhm.
And I love doing that because I can read diary entries, I could read memoirs, and it kind of is just like, here is a whole lot of research that you don't then have to make up. So it makes my job easier in some senses because here's the information, but it also makes it harder because you don't want to just say exactly what you read because it's been done before. And then it's also just a big puzzle piece to fit it all together because Marion and Evelyn are probably like 15 different women all in 2 different packages. So it was fun to take information and see how it could fit into their personalities or which ones didn't fit. And it's a big puzzle. It's fun.
Yeah, that is interesting. It hadn't occurred to me that that is your first adult novel. And I'm trying to remember your middle grade. I think it might be your first novel where it wasn't entirely about a real person, where it was more of like a conglomeration of real people and two characters. Your latest 2 novels, A Betting Woman, and of course, The Call of the Wrens, are about little-known women in history. Of course, Bonnie, I think everyone knows Bonnie of Bonnie and Clyde. It would be hard to make it far in this world without having heard her name. But these women I had never heard of, and I do quite a bit of historical reading and research.
Mm-hmm.
The most fascinating stories. So do you remember the first time you heard about their stories?
And A Betting Woman, so that's about a woman whose nickname was Madame Mustache. And I came across her, and I'm trying to remember what book I was working on, and I can't recall. I mean, you're right. You know that like we write these books and then they don't come out for like years later. So I'm like really going back in my brain here. But I came across Eleanor's name while I was researching oh, you know what it was? I was working on promotions for Becoming Bonnie and Side by Side, my Bonnie Parker books, and someone asked me to put together a list of outlaws, and I came across Eleanor Dumont, which is nicknamed Madame Mustache. So I feel like all of my ideas like kind of relate. Like even the book I'm working on now, which hasn't been titled yet, but it's about a woman who survives 3 maritime disasters. Like she survives Titanic, Britannic, and the Epic. I like bring back Percy, who is in the Call of the Wrens, in this next book. So I love when my stories overlap and like recall from each other's storylines, and it makes it fun for me.
That's so fun. I know The Call of the Wrens is not even yet out as we are recording right now, but now I'm really excited about reading your next one. Which I think I read is coming out in 2023. Is that right?
I think it's November of 2023. So I'm working on that one now and getting it over to my editor soon.
I imagine researching for relatively unknown women differed quite a bit from researching Bonnie and Clyde, who I think nearly everyone has heard of. What has your research process been like, and how have they differed, or your process differed with each novel?
Well, so with someone like Bonnie and Becoming Bonnie, that one made me nervous because, like you said, they are very well known. They're very iconic. There's so many ways you can get it wrong, and people will let you know when you get it wrong. So it's always a bit nerve wracking. But the one thing I like about historical fiction is that since it happened so long in the past and documentation is different, maybe not as great back in the 1920s, there's situations where something would happen to Bonnie Parker, and there's like 4 or 5 different eyewitnesses, and they each have a different story. So it kind of gives you a little bit leeway to be like, okay, maybe that's not how you think it happened, but someone else said it did happen that way. So it does kind of create this like little element of peace in me that I can tell it and not get crucified. But with the Call of the Wrens, writing these fictional characters, it was very freeing to be able to just create whatever storyline that I wanted to. So that was a nice change from, let's say, like in Becoming Bonnie, almost having these like touch points that I needed to hit and then filling it in between each touch point. This was just like one big touch point that I could do whatever I wanted to with.
Well, for 5 years, I've been watching your career, and I am inspired by what you've done. And although we've corresponded quite a bit in the time, I don't think I've ever asked you for advice. So I'm going to take advantage of this podcast platform and ask what advice you have for writers, either those who are newly published or those hoping to land an agent or publishing contract.
Well, I feel like this one's been said before, but it doesn't make it any less true. And it's just to read, like read within your genre, read outside of your genre. I am so inspired by the books that I read. Like the content in it could spark an idea, or even just the way that other authors like put together a sentence. You're like, wow, that was amazing. I want to emulate that. And then you just never know what you're going to learn when you're reading that could, like I said, spark an idea. I was just reading, what was it called? The Marriage Contract by Samantha Hastings. And it's a novella, and it's a Regency novella. And it actually sparked a middle grade contemporary idea. So it couldn't be any different. We have an adult novella that's set Regency, and it sparked like a middle grade idea that's set now. So you just never know what you're going to come across that just lights up something in your brain.
Well, that's a great segue into my next question, because I love asking authors what they're reading, and I think they always have the best book recommendations. So tell us a bit more about your reading world. What books have you enjoyed lately?
Well, I am very influenced by what I see. If there's a book all over Instagram, chances are I will buy it. So it works. I'm reading an ebook of The Ways We Hide by Christina McMorris. I just started it, so I don't know too much about it. And sometimes I don't like reading the summary because I don't want any idea of what's to come. But I did see somebody post a picture with a Monopoly board behind it. So I'm like, ooh, that's very intriguing, because I did know that some people used board games during the Second World War to like get information, to disperse information. So I'm excited to see what happens there. And then I read an early copy of The Matchmaker's Gift. I read an e-galley, and I loved it so much that I had to get a copy for my shelf. So I just finished, well, I actually reread it. So I just reread that one. And then this one was my, was it October book of the month pick? I think all of my months blend together, but I haven't started it yet, but I'm excited to read Hester. So those are the 3 that I am kind of on my radar or have read recently.
I love that you don't read the synopsis. I'm the same way. I don't read reviews, and I don't read the synopsis. I basically just base it off of the author and the title. And maybe a 1-sentence blurb is all I'll get. I love that.
Yes, I will. So if there's like something in bold at the top, I'll read that, because generally that's like what they really want you to hit home with the hook. And if that gets me, then I'm hooked.
Exactly. Of course, I want to share how people can find you. So would you mind telling us your website and where you prefer to hang out on social media?
Sure. So I'm JenniLWalsh.com. I spell my name different, so it's Jenni. And my social media is just Jenni L. Walsh. No matter where you go, that's where I am. I make it easy on everybody. I hang out on Instagram a lot. It's just so pretty. And like I said, I'm greatly influenced by what everyone posts. So yeah, find me there.
Connected too.
Mm-hmm.
And before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered yet?
Well, I could mention the next book that I briefly mentioned.
Yes, please.
I'm working on it now, and it's a story about a woman named Violet Jessup, and she survived, like I said, 3 disasters at sea, and first the Olympic, then Titanic, and then Britannic. And she was a stewardess, and she was also a nurse during the First World War. And because she survived all 3 of these disasters, she earned the nickname of Miss Unsinkable. And she has a memoir that I read, which I said I love memoirs because they give you all the information. So I'm working on telling her story, and then I thought it would be fun if I introduced a second storyline of a fictional character. So Violet's story, is based on her real life, and then a fictional character who is kind of her own Miss Unsinkable. And she'll be involved in the Second World War as a special operative executive, as an SOE agent. So that's been so fun to research, and I love telling those stories where the one storyline, the second storyline, and they kind of come together and things get interesting.
I can't decide if she had epically bad luck for being part of 3 disasters or epically good luck for having survived all 3 when
Well,
died.
it's funny you say that because I just wrote a scene where Violet's love interest is like, I don't know if I should tell you to stay away from the sea because don't go there, or if you should just keep doing what you're doing because you clearly have amazing luck.
So good. I love it. Well, it was a pleasure chatting with you today. I can't thank you enough for coming on this podcast and sharing a bit about your books and background. And it's really nice to be able to chat with you again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.